یک قسمت باز درباره خب شروع کردیم شروع رنسانس و قسمت بعدیش یا اوج که میگیره رنسانس و بعد قسمت آخرش که یعنی 3 دوره می داشته باشه. خود دوره سیوم که از سال 1530 تا قرن 17 دیگه شروع قرن 17 تا 1930 تا 16 قرن 16 17 دیگه شروع دوام پیدا میکنه. نقاشی دیگه میگن که هم هنر نقاشی در ایتالیا فرم دیگه میتن و از اون جمله هم مثلا کاراواجو هست. نام اصلیش کاراواجو نه باشه، خب نام اصلیش میکلانجلو میریشی هست که در سال 1571 تولد میشه و در فعالیتش میبره تا سالهای 1610. و هم نقاش دیگه است به نام انیبالی گراسی، اینا هم آثار رو خلق میکنه، ولی از کاراواجو کارایش فرم جدید و میته و هنر نقاشی و رنگ تاریک و روشن کوشش میکنه که در مقابل دیگه قرار بده که تاثیرات هنرمندایی پس که آلند هم نقاشی میکنه مثل ریمبراند و دیگر هم زیاد تاثیر میگذاره که در این قسمت باز فیلم ها رو ببینیم که بسیار جالب است که چطور تاثیر کرده. این شروع یه دورای آخر چیز می باشه، نقاشی هایی که باز پسانا توصیلات 30 سال اثر روبنز در قسمت قبلی گفتم درباره روبنز هم پروگرام رو سابسکرایب کنین، ببینین، تعقیب کنین، آموزنده است براتون، بسیار جالب است. چون هر تابلو رو من جداگانه سر صحبت کردن تو وقت بسیار زیاده میگیره، ولی در مجموع فعلا عمومی صحبت میکنیم و جا داره من قسمت جدا کنم، نمیشه همیشه بخاطر که هر دوره و هر هنرمند هر نقاش استایل خاص خود داشته و بسیار جالب که سرحضی ها هر کدامش جداگانه صحبت شد، مشترک نمیشه، چون هر کدامشون کار بسیار بزرگتر در دنیای هنر انجام دادن. ببینیم آموزنده است و هم خودتون هم کوشش کنیم که از صفحات اینترنتی یا از کتابخانه ها یا در میفهم در وسط خود کتابا نیست، خب ولی چیزایی که هست از اون استفاده کنیم. ولی خوشبختانه فعلا از طریق اینترنتی یا میتونید باز مسائل ببینید و تعقیب کنید. تشکر، خدا کنه که آموزنده باشه.
Fruity pictures with grapes and apples. And he also painted pictures of people having fun, playing cards, telling fortunes. But he's most famous for his dark, dramatic pictures. Look at Medusa with a hair of snakes, or the Bible story of what beautiful Judith did to people she didn't like, or the boy David, showing us what happened to the giant Goliath after he knocked him out with his catapult. What you've got to remember about Caravaggio is that he's an Italian. He's a painter, and he was born a long time ago, about the time of Queen Elizabeth. This little movie is going to tell you everything interesting about Caravaggio and what he did in 5 minutes flat. So watch, listen, and then wow your mum, your dad, or even your teacher with what a brain box you are. First things first, his real name was Michelangelo de Medici. I'll tell you why he's known as Caravaggio in just a minute. Let's start at the beginning, when he was a small boy. We are in Italy, in Milan, and a terrible disease called the plague has broken out, and everyone is rushing to escape from the city. Little Michelangelo is only 5 years old. Nowadays, we know that this plague has been brought by fleas and the rats which infested the town. But they didn't. His mother, Lucia, is trying to protect herself from the germs with a little hanky, and his father, who is an architect, is desperate to save some of his favourite models as they hurry away. People are dying all around them, and they need...
Hello, my name is Letizia Trevis, and I'm the curator of the later Italian and Spanish pictures here at National Gallery. And by popular demand, today I'm going to talk to you about Caravaggio. And Caravaggio is an artist who's as well known for his art as he is for his bad behaviour. And the purpose of today's talk is really to talk you through his life. So it is, a lot about the biography of the artist, but I'm going to use the pictures that we have here to illustrate why he was so famous then and so innovative in his style. And the National Gallery is extremely lucky to have 3 major works by Caravaggio, one from each of the distinct phases of his career. So it's the sort of perfect place to give you this talk, if you like. So Caravaggio was born in Milan in 1571. But his name is Michelangelo Merisi, but he's known as Caravaggio after the small town to the east of Milan from which his parents came and where he spent quite a few years during his childhood as well. His father was a mason, a muratore, and he died when Caravaggio was just 6 years old. And there's been speculation as to whether Caravaggio was sort of launched in that career before he became a painter, but there's really no evidence for that. What we do know is that when he was 13, he was sent to Milan, and he signed a 4-year apprenticeship with an artist called Simone Peterzano, an artist from Bergamo, who'd worked in Venice and who sort of styled himself as Titian's pupil. And he worked with him for 4 years, and we have a contract, but we don't have much else. But one can imagine that in the workshop, he learned the rudiments of drawing, he learned how to draw in colours, how to prepare canvases, he may have learned how to paint in fresco, although he is not a fresco painter later on in his career. And after these 4 years with Peterzano, there's a sort of mystery. We don't really know what happened to him until 1592, and that is when he goes to Rome, almost certainly in 1592, around the age of 20. And this is the problem with Caravaggio. There's very little documentary evidence, and of course it's been scrutinised and read in many, many different ways. And it's very fragmentary, and so we've tried to reconstruct his life on the basis of the documents. But really we rely enormously on the biographers who wrote about him, which of course do provide conflicting information sometimes, and often have their own slant on Caravaggio. So even that has to be sort of taken with a pinch of salt. But Caravaggio arrives in Rome, he's about 20, and of course now we know he became a very famous artist, but when he arrived, he was a nobody. He arrived and he really was desperate, destitute. He jumped from one workshop to another. He painted hack work. We know he produced these sort of heads, 3 heads a day for no money. He lived with someone called Pandolfo Pucci, who he nicknamed Monsignor Insalata, Mr. Salad, because apparently that's all he ate under his roof. He was given very meagre food. But the biographers do agree on certain points of these early years. It seems that he arrived and somehow worked in the workshop of a Sicilian painter called Lorenzo Carli. We know nothing about him, really. And no paintings can be attributed to him from this time. And then he worked in 2 other workshops, Antiveduto Grammatica, of youths and boys, which I should say are often based clearly on live models and on people that Caravaggio knew. Sometimes they also include his own portrait. We know he used his own image because he couldn't afford models. He couldn't afford to pay models. And this picture has also been read as a self-portrait, although generally that's now discounting. I personally don't think it is a self-portrait. I mean, I'm sure you know this picture, and if not, after the talk, do come and look at it more closely. The really striking element of these early works is the quality of the still life. I mean, this fruit, you can just pick these cherries up, it's good enough to eat. And the combination of that with these sort of sensual youths, patron, and also for a private environment. They were hanging in these palazzi, and they were really accessible to only a few people, and an elite, if you like. But suddenly this is his first public commission, and it's the first time that his art can be seen, you know, in the public domain, if you like, is accessible to artists and people visiting Rome. And when these pictures were unveiled, and you can still see them today in the Contarelli Chapel, the calling of St. Matthew and the martyrdom of St. Matthew, when they were unveiled, I mean, it caused a real sensation. And we know from the biographers, people flocked to Rome to see these pictures. And of course, it was part of an artist's training. You would go to Rome and you look at classical antiquity, and you'd also look at contemporary art being produced. And so artists from all over Europe were coming to Rome. And so very quickly, Caravaggio's fame and reputation really went far beyond the confines of Rome itself with these public paintings. And shortly after the Contarelli Chapel, he was commissioned to paint pictures in Santa Maria del Popolo, in the Cerasi Chapel. Again, these are private commissions, these are private patrons. It's not the church itself commissioning him, but these pictures were
looking at Pontormo's Entombment, a typical Mannerist painting from about 1520. And we want to use this as a starting off point to talk about what follows Mannerism.
Right, a kind of rejection of Mannerism is going to
Very rhetorically, a rejection of Mannerism is going to come around beginning in the last quarter of the 16th century, in the late 1570s, especially 1580s and onwards.
And I can see why people would reject it. I mean, it's incredibly complicated.
Exactly.
It's difficult to read.
Sure.
It's hard to tell what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of reasons that this doesn't sort of seem like the traditional definition of art, especially when you think about the Renaissance and its interest in naturalism.
All of the qualities, its difficulty in reading, its enigmatic qualities, the very stylized, elegant nature, these were all things that made Mannerist art good in the Mannerist period. But after over 50 years of Mannerism's dominance in Italy, beginning in the 1520s and reaching towards the end of the century, a backlash does begin to build exactly towards the issues that you were talking about, and there's a growing desire for many reasons for a return to the basic principles of the High Renaissance, which they look back upon from 70 years later as a period when art was good for several different reasons.
And so one of the reasons that they're going to reject Mannerism has to do with its legibility at a time when the church is being attacked and really needs art to communicate in a very easy and direct way, right, because of the Reformation.
Sure. The Protestant Reformation was criticizing art coming out of the Catholic areas for being too distracting and for not communicating the story well, and so, as we know, the Protestants tended to put their emphasis on the written word in the Bible rather than on art, because they would point to something like this and say, this is not a good religious teaching tool.
Right, and the whole way that the church defended art.
Rembrandt van Rijn was a 17th century Dutch painter. Dutch is the word for people from the Netherlands, which is a small country in Western Europe. Rembrandt is considered by many to be one of the greatest painters in the history of European art, and most people agree that he is the most important Dutch painter in history. He was born into a large family, the 9th child of parents with enough money to make sure he was well educated. He began studying art when he was very young and set up his own studio by the age of 19. By age 21, he was a teacher himself. In 1631, Rembrandt moved to Amsterdam, the capital of the Netherlands, and became a successful portrait painter. Portraits are paintings or pictures of people. Because he lived before cameras and photographs were invented, anyone who wanted a picture of themselves or a family member needed to have a portrait drawn or painted. Rembrandt was in high demand as a portrait artist because he seemed to have a talent for capturing his subject's personality and emotions. The portraits he painted seemed almost alive, and he was very good at painting people in active poses. As well as painting many portraits and self-portraits, Rembrandt is famous for his paintings of history, mythology, and religious subjects. Although Rembrandt was very successful during his lifetime and sold many paintings, he had trouble with money. He bought a house that was very expensive. He also bought many beautiful paintings, antiques, and objects from faraway lands. No matter how much money he made selling paintings, he spent it. Eventually, he even had to sell his collection of art and beautiful objects to pay his bills, and when he died in 1669, he was very poor. Today, Rembrandt is remembered mostly for his beautiful paintings. He was excellent at painting people and emotions, light and shadow, movement and texture. The detailed realism of his artwork has inspired generations of artists and art lovers, and his paintings continue to be some of the most valued art in the world.
Set Caravaggio on a path of work for powerful patrons who would come to protect him.
I hope you enjoyed learning about the famous artist Rembrandt and seeing some of his beautiful artwork. Goodbye.
Catholic cardinal took to his work and became his patron, providing him with room and board. This set Caravaggio on a path of work for powerful patrons who would come to protect Caravaggio in his run-ins with the law. Caravaggio painted with intense realism, using direct sources of light that faded into darkness. People were shown just as the eyes see them, with all their natural flaws and defects. His biblical scenes showed a spiritualness and sensitivity, but they were also shrouded in darkness. Caravaggio himself was tormented by darkness. He was fond of drinking and gambling, and after working for weeks, he would set out for the streets, carrying a sword and looking for a fight. In 1606, one of Caravaggio's brawls left a man dead. His patrons would not protect him from this murder, so Caravaggio was again forced to flee. He ran and hid from place to place. Local citizens reported sightings of a strange man who loudly ridiculed painters and slept fully clothed with a dagger at his side. He was a nervous wreck, and his paintings depicted shadowy figures standing isolated in great empty backgrounds, revealing the desperate state of his mind. On July 18, 1610, Caravaggio's body was discovered. The cause of death remains shrouded in mystery. Caravaggio's temperament was notorious during this time and left him with many troubles. His art has stood the test of time, and the intensity of his work came to be a main source of influence to the great artists to come. All works, no matter what or by whom painted, are nothing but bagatelles and childish trifles, unless they are made and painted from life, and there can be nothing better than to follow nature.
این درباره کاراواجو و دوره آخر رنسانس. خدا کنه خوش دارم بده باشه. کامیو کاستی ها رو باشین سبسکرایب کنین، سعی کنین و امروز زمان کم کم چیزهای دیگه رو تقدیمتون میکنیم. تشکر.